Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Firewalls Don't Stop Dragons. I'm your host, Kerry Parker. Today we have episode 373 for April 22nd, 2024. We've got a really big news show for you this week. I basically have 2 news shows worth of stuff to catch you up on. Don't worry, it won't be twice as long. I have trimmed it down to only the essential stuff, but we still have a lot of things to cover today. Before we get to that, of course, I want to remind you that the Treasure and Coin promotion is still going on for new patrons. With this promotion, if you sign up for an annual membership at one of the top 2 tiers, you will get a spiffy, highly collectible, security-enhancing Dragon Challenge Coin. These things are really, really cool. I am so proud of these things. So glad I decided to mint these things. There's only 100 of them on the planet, 200, I guess, if you count the original version. But of the current one I'm doing, there are only 100 available. Actually, only 90, because I did 10 kind of secret black coins, which I was going to do something special with, which I haven't decided exactly what to do. I was thinking about giving them out as kind of very special awards, but I haven't made that happen yet. So really, there's only 90 available to the public. So, that's super collectible, right? Only 90 exist on the planet. So if you'd like to get your coin, you have about another week to do it. This promotion will end then. I will surely do another one of these in the future, but who knows when. Last one was over a year ago, I think. So anyway, now is the time. Go to fdsd.me/promo424. 424 being a reference to April of 2024 to help you remember. First up, I'm going to give you an update on the AT&T data breach. They have since said that it has impacted 51 million customers, not just 7 million, like the last time we talked about it. If you're getting a whole bunch of password reset notifications on your iPhone, that is somebody trying to scam you. I'll tell you all about that. Proton's been putting out a lot of very interesting blog articles slamming their competitors, basically. But I found this article pretty interesting. It's about Microsoft's Outlook and how they are now collecting lots of your data. There was an interesting hack using HTML and CSS in emails, and I've got a little article from Lutra Security about that. Bruce Schneier had a blog about the XZ Utils hack that almost happened, which would have been absolutely catastrophic, and there's a lot of things we need to learn from that. AI is everywhere, and it is a beast that must be fed, and all these companies that are touting their new AI features are doing their damnedest to hoover up all the available information, and they're doing some pretty shady things to do that. And in this particular article, I'm going to tell you how Google has been using transcriptions of YouTube videos to train their AI. Meta is adding AI to all of its tools, Facebook, Instagram, Messenger, WhatsApp. And even though I'll be reading an article from Lifehacker called How to Turn It Off, I don't really think there's a way to turn it off, but I'll at least inform you about that. I've got a couple articles about smart TVs, one article from Bitdefender about some nasty vulnerabilities found in LG TVs, and another from Lifehacker about 500,000 accounts from Roku that were compromised. And then I actually have several articles that are more positive, or at least just more informative and not quite so dire. One about how X, formerly Twitter, is planning to charge new users a small fee to try to cut back on bots, and I'll give you my take on that. DuckDuckGo has just released a very interesting subscription service that has 3 features: a VPN, a data removal service, and identity theft insurance. We're going to talk mostly about the data removal part of that. Google has just launched a Find My Device service, very similar to the iPhone Find My Network. And then I've got a few articles actually about the FCC, the FTC, and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau here in the U.S. and how they are doing their best to help protect our data without having a privacy law. And then finally, we'll wrap up with my tip of the week, which is in response to our very first story about AT&T, and basically why you just need to go freeze your credit, like now, like right after you listen to this episode. Just do it. I'll tell you how and why. So strap in, everybody. Lots to get to. Let's do it. All right, first up, the AT&T breach. We talked about this last time. It's just gotten worse. Here's an update from Bleeping Computer. AT&T is notifying 51 million former and current customers, warning them of a data breach that exposed their personal information on a hacking forum. However, the company has still not disclosed how the data was obtained, and honestly, they may not yet know. These notifications are related to the recent leak of a massive amount of AT&T customer data on the breached hacking forums that was offered for sale for $1 million back in 2021. When threat actor Shiny Hunters first listed the AT&T data for sale in 2021, the company told Bleeping Computer that the collection did not belong to them and that their systems had not been breached. Last month, when another threat actor known as Major Nelson, I assume that's a reference to the I Dream of Jeannie character? Anyway, leaked the entire dataset on a hacking forum. AT&T once again told Bleeping Computer that the data did not originate from them and their systems were not breached. After Bleeping Computer confirmed that the data belonged to AT&T and DirecTV accounts, and TechCrunch reported AT&T passcodes were in the data dump, AT&T finally confirmed that the data belonged to them. While the leak contained information for more than 70 million people, AT&T is now saying that it impacted a total of 51,226,382 customers. And this is a quote from AT&T, quote, "The exposed information varied by individual and account, but may have included full name, email address, mailing address, phone number, social security number, date of birth, AT&T account number, and AT&T passcode. To the best of our knowledge, personal financial information and call history were not included." Oh, good. "Based on our investigation to date, the data appears to be from June 2019 or earlier," unquote. Bleeping Computer contacted AT&T as to why there is such a large difference in impacted customers and was told that some of the people had multiple accounts in the dataset. So in other words, there were 70 million records, but they're claiming only 51 million people were affected. That's because apparently there were some duplicates. AT&T also is quoted as saying here, quote, "We are sending a communication to each person whose sensitive personal information was included. Some people had more than one account in the dataset, and others did not have sensitive personal information," unquote. The company still has not disclosed how the data was stolen and why it took them almost 5 years to confirm that it belonged to them and to alert customers. Furthermore, the company told the Maine Attorney General's office that they first learned of the breach on March 26, 2024, yet Bleeping Computer first contacted AT&T about it on March 17th, and the information was for sale first in 2021. While it is likely too late, as the data has been privately circulating for years, AT&T is offering 1 year of identity theft protection and credit monitoring services through Experian, with instructions enclosed in the notices. The enrollment deadline was set to August 30th of 2024, but exposed people should move much faster to protect themselves. Recipients are urged to stay vigilant, monitor their accounts and credit reports for suspicious activity, and treat unsolicited communications with elevated caution. And I'll come back to that in a second. For the admitted security lapse and the massive delay in verifying the data breach claims and informing affected customers accordingly, AT&T is facing multiple class action lawsuits in the United States. Considering that the data was stolen in 2021, cybercriminals have had ample opportunity to exploit the dataset and launch targeted attacks against exposed AT&T customers. However, the dataset has now been leaked to the broader cybercrime community, exponentially increasing the risk for former and current AT&T customers. So this is precisely the kind of data that bad guys would need to perform identity theft. But it's also the kind of information that would be very good for doing targeted phishing attacks as well. And it wouldn't take much to automate this with a computer, certainly via email and text. So yes, former and current AT&T customers, including DirecTV customers, because AT&T bought DirecTV, should be very, very suspicious of communications, even ones that, give up information that supposedly only AT&T would know, claiming to be AT&T or some representative of them or some partner of theirs, or really anyone at this point. You just have to be very careful, be on your guard against phishing attempts. And if you have not ever done this or done it recently, get your annual credit reports from each of the 3 big credit bureaus, Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion. You want to go to annualcreditreport.com. I really wish they would make that a .gov, but anyway, that is the official website. You can start from there and it will help you get all your credit reports. And if AT&T does contact you to say, hey, you were affected by this, I see no reason whatsoever not to take them up on their offer for a free credit monitoring and identity theft protection services. Just be careful. If they ask for a credit card, they may try to automatically renew your subscription after that first free year is up. So set a reminder if you don't want to be automatically charged for the rest of your life starting next year when it ends. So related to that, there's just really no excuse at this point if you're a U.S. citizen to not freeze your credit. It is past time that we just all do this. In fact, I almost wish it was done by default. But of course, that's how they make their money, and they don't like it when you freeze your credit. But I will get into all that when we get to my tip of the week. Now, I am and have been an AT&T customer. I have not been contacted about this, so I could have assumed that I was not, quote unquote, impacted by this particular breach. However, I did go to my AT&T account and logged in just to make sure I didn't miss it, or maybe their notification went to my junk folder or something. And I looked on my AT&T account for any alerts, and hey, there was one alert up in the corner. I'm like, okay, well, this is it. And I went to read my one alert. There's notifications and there's alert. So there was just one alert. So I thought, okay, well, this must be important. This is probably about the breach. The one alert said, save 25% on floral and functional cases from Carson and Quinn. I'm not kidding. That was their alert. Drives me nuts. So anyway, I went ahead and changed my PIN anyway. If you do not have a security PIN on your cellular account, you should absolutely do so. Regardless of who your carrier is or where you live, it's a sort of like a two-factor authentication thing that could be used to protect your account. I would absolutely do that. I went ahead and changed my PIN just for funsies, even though I've not been contacted saying that my PIN was part of this breach. I had to give them the last four of my social security number and my zip code, which of course the bad guys could have if they got this breach information. But it also sent me an SMS code to my phone to verify that it was me, which is still, not great, but it's better than nothing. And that allowed me to change my PIN code, which I did. All right, so we'll come back to the credit freeze thing for the tip of the week, but let's move on with the news. Next up, this is from Apple Insider. Apple users are becoming the target of a new wave of phishing attacks called MFA bombing, or multi-factor authentication bombing, that relies on user impatience and a bug in Apple's password reset mechanism. Phishing attacks often rely on users supplying information to an attacker or allowing them to do something to their account, often via an email, text message, or other messaging means. A recently discovered phishing attack has used a new route to make victims fall for it by using Apple's password reset system. Dubbed MFA bombing, MFA fatigue, or push bombing, the attack detailed by Krebs on Security is an elaborate phishing attack that appears to revolve around a bug in the password reset feature. Victims are inundated by reset password notifications, including the text, "Use this iPhone to reset your Apple ID password," and the options to allow or reject the request. This notification is genuine. It is usually displayed once to the user when they attempt to reset their Apple ID password as a form of multi-factor authentication on an iPhone, Mac, iPad, or Apple Watch. And by the way, it's common for that notification to go to every one of your devices. So one notification to all your devices. The problem with the attack is that the attacker is bombarding the target with so many notifications. It is hoped that the user will either accidentally select allow instead of don't allow, or will be so annoyed by the deluge of notifications that they will select allow in order to make it stop. In this instance, selecting allow would let the attacker reset the Apple ID password, granting access to the account. If the sheer number of notifications doesn't work for the attacker, a second phase can occur if they know the target's phone number. The victim is called by the attackers, posing as Apple support, with the calling phone number spoofed to display Apple's actual customer support number. After an unusual number of notifications that may seem like a bug, an unwary victim may believe the caller is genuinely from Apple itself. Victims are then asked to verify their information, with the attacker using data sources such as websites that offer identity details to quote-unquote confirm other account details, all to be more convincing. Once the victim believes the caller is Apple support, the attacker can then trigger, again, the Apple ID reset code to be sent to the victim in a bid to get them to reveal the one-time password to the support agent. Again, this allows the attacker to reset the account password and lock the user out. Apple users facing such an attack have a few opportunities to ward off the attack, but at this time, the notifications cannot be stopped from coming through. Victims do have to be vigilant and select Don't Allow every single time it appears. If the attackers call up pressing for the code, the best practice is to tell them that you will call them back via the official Apple support number. Apple also will not provide customer information over the phone as a form of verification, which is another indicator that the caller isn't genuine. Enabling the Apple recovery key is a more extreme option that will help ensure the account password reset cannot be performed by an attacker. It does require you to hold on to a lengthy passcode to perform the action for yourself in the future. As the notification for it says, the code shouldn't be provided to anybody, even on request. So I skipped over some details in there. It actually talks about what the Apple recovery key is. I've set this up for my Apple iCloud account. If you just look up Apple recovery key, you'll get more information on that. It's not for everybody, but it is something that you might want to consider doing if you want to be sure to protect your Apple account. It puts more onus on you to protect your account, which I'm okay with. But I realize this is inconvenient for most people, and a lot of people don't want to do this. So in the meantime, if you do get this sort of attack, just be aware of what this is. And until Apple comes up with some way to maybe limit the number of notifications or find a workaround for this problem, as far as I know, it's still possible. So this is somebody who knows your Apple ID somehow and is trying to get you to reset your password so that they can reset it and get into your account and take over your account. So just be aware that this is an attack strategy being used right now and what it means when you see it. If you do somehow accidentally click allow on one of these, on one of those multiple notifications, or if you fall for the phone call and give away a code to them there, at that point, you're probably already locked out and you're going to have to contact Apple support immediately to see if you can get that rectified. Okay, let's move on. This is from Proton. They've been doing a lot of blogging lately about how bad other companies are and obviously presenting themselves as the private alternative. But I thought this was really interesting. So take this with a little grain of salt, obviously, because this is meant to paint Microsoft with the worst possible light. But this does sound pretty bad, and it's something I think you should be aware of. With Microsoft's rollout of the new Outlook for Windows, it appears the company has transformed its email app into a surveillance tool for targeted advertising. Everybody talks about the privacy washing campaigns of Google and Apple as they mine your online data to generate advertising revenue. But now it looks like Outlook is no longer simply an email service. It's a data collection mechanism for Microsoft's 801 external partners and an ad delivery system for Microsoft itself. Some European users who downloaded the new Outlook for Windows will encounter a modal dialogue with a troubling disclosure about how Microsoft and several hundred third parties process their data. And there's an image in this article, if you want to see it, that shows apparently what you would see if you were in the EU. The window informs users that Microsoft and these 801 third parties use their data for a number of purposes, including to store and or access information on the user's device, develop and improve products, personalize ads and content, measure ads and content, derive audience insights, obtain precise geolocation data, and identify users through device scanning. This latest version of Outlook confirms that more of big tech's profit margins are becoming ever more dependent on the collection of your personal data. Outlook also prompts you to choose how ads look on your screen, making it clear that advertising is a key part of the deal. Mac users logged into the new Outlook will even encounter ads that appear as inbox messages. Some ads are for Microsoft applications, while others come from third parties selling products. Thanks to the EU's GDPR, Europeans are at least informed that a small village of third parties will be able to look at their data. Americans, thanks to their government's refusal to pass privacy legislation, are never even informed that this is happening. In Outlook settings, UK users can explore a list of advertising partners, which shows the disturbing number of ad companies working with Microsoft. These third-party companies, called partners, carry names such as AdMax and AdSoci. This is unavailable in the settings for users in the US and Switzerland. With the new Outlook, Microsoft forces users to enter maze-like privacy statements to seize back some control of their data. Of course, Microsoft knows that almost no one reads privacy policies. If everyone understood those policies, revenue would be jeopardized. Microsoft's integration of Outlook with cloud services has raised privacy alarm bells. When you sync third-party email accounts from services like Yahoo or Gmail, with the new Outlook, you risk granting Microsoft access to the IMAP and SMTP credentials, emails, contacts, and events associated with those accounts, according to the German IT blog Hesse Online. And this is a quote from Heise, quote, "Although Microsoft explains that it is possible to switch back to the previous apps at any time, the data will already be stored by the company. This allows Microsoft to read the emails," unquote. Microsoft is enabling itself to access your email account at any time without your knowledge, allowing it to scan and analyze your emails and share them with third parties. To users unaware of the privacy implications, using the new Outlook may seem harmless, but what it could mean is welcoming Microsoft into your data vault and giving them complete freedom to potentially use it however they want. All right, so just real quick, here's what they're talking about with the access to the other accounts. Normally, when you set up an email client like, Apple's Mail client or the Outlook application, you're running an application that is going to get your mail. Well, obviously, if you're setting up Outlook for Outlook.com, you're going to set it up with Microsoft, and that's fine. But you can use those same mail clients to get mail from other services as well, like Yahoo or Gmail or whatever. All you have to do is give them the login credentials for those accounts, and it will go get the mail from those other accounts too and put them all conveniently into one little inbox. If you've ever done that, that's fine. But apparently what Proton is saying here, what Microsoft is doing is that when you use this service, it is now uploading those credentials to the cloud, to Microsoft's cloud service. And according to the article, in plain text, meaning that now the company has saved those credentials where it has access to them. Normally, when you're just putting them in your Outlook client or your mail client or whatever, they stay local. They're just used by your client to connect to the Yahoo or the Gmail or iCloud or whatever service to authenticate and then download your mail. But that doesn't necessarily mean that those credentials are given over to the owner of the client, the company that wrote the software that you're using. But in this case, that is exactly what Proton is claiming is going on. And they apparently have tested this and shown that if you put in the credentials for other accounts into your client, they are uploading those credentials to Microsoft. And this article is implying that is giving Microsoft access to those other accounts, meaning that Microsoft can be trolling through your other email accounts, not just their Outlook account, the one that you have with them. But if you've given them credentials and they've uploaded them to their servers, they can be using those credentials to access your Gmail and your Yahoo and your other accounts, not only reading your mail to try to market stuff to you, but everything else that those accounts have access to, all your contacts, potentially calendars, docs, and other things like that. So that's pretty shady, and that is not a good practice. And I don't know if there's a switch to tell them not to do that, but obviously the main way not to do that is just not give them your credentials. Now, if you've already given your credentials, I'm not sure that you could remove them, because even though if you could delete those accounts from your mail client and say, okay, I don't want you checking that email anymore, I'm going to take these credentials away, they have still been uploaded to Microsoft somewhere. And again, this article is kind of implying that Microsoft is holding on to that and potentially using it to continue accessing that stuff. I hope that is not the case. You would hope that once you tell them to at least delete those accounts, that they would delete those credentials and stop accessing them. But that is kind of what Proton is implying here. And if that is really what's going on, that's really bad. All right, next up, this is from Lutra Security, and I would not have found this had Bruce Schneier not linked to it. And I was going to read Bruce's summary, but I actually just went to the original article, and I want to make sure I give credit to the original company that did this. And this is an excerpt from an article they called Kobold Letters. The email your manager received and forwarded to you was something completely innocent, such as a potential customer asking a few questions. All that email was supposed to achieve was being forwarded to you. However, the moment the email appeared in your inbox, it changed. The innocent pretext disappeared and the real phishing email became visible. A phishing email you had to trust because you knew the sender, and they even confirmed that they had forwarded it to you, in other words, your boss. The attack is possible because most email clients allow CSS, which is short for cascading style sheets, to be used to style HTML emails, and HTML is the language of the web. When an email is forwarded, the position of the original email in the DOM, the document object model, usually changes, allowing for CSS rules to be selectively applied only when an email has been forwarded. An attacker can use this to include elements in the email that appear or disappear, depending on the context in which the email is viewed. Because they are usually invisible, only appear in certain circumstances, and can be used for all sorts of mischief, I'll refer to these elements as Kobold letters, after the elusive sprites of mythology. This affects all type of email clients and web mailers that support HTML email. So, pretty much all of them. And it goes into a whole lot of detail, technical detail that I'm going to skip here, but it sums up with this. Users can mitigate Kobold letters by disabling HTML email altogether or viewing it in a restricted mode, e.g. plain email in Thunderbird. For email clients, it is more difficult to implement a mitigation, but would also break a lot of existing solutions in the email ecosystem. An implementation like the one Google already uses for Gmail could be a compromise that allows for stylized corporate newsletters while limiting the risks of HTML email. Unfortunately, for the foreseeable future, it is sadly not realistic to expect email clients to implement robust mitigation. This means that it's up to the users to be aware of the dangers of HTML emails and to take the necessary precautions. All right, so let me see if I can explain this. What they're saying is going on here, and this is devilishly clever, is HTML or hypertext markup language and CSS or cascading style sheets. These are basically the formatting functions for all web pages. And most email today is formatted using these tools because it's pretty. It lets you do some really fancy stuff, more than just bold and underline and italics and that kind of stuff. It lets you put in links and images and, wrap the images around the text in pretty ways and put boxes around things. HTML and CSS is just the kind of the de facto standards used for making pretty documents. So you could do some really funky things with CSS, and you can in particular hide and reveal text. Like you could put text in a document that is not seen, though if you were to right click on that document and say view source, which is what you would do on a web page, it's not always possible on an email client. But if you did this on a web page and right clicked on any web page and said, view source, you would actually see all the HTML and CSS plus other things like JavaScript that make up that web page. And you may find that there's a lot of text in there that you don't see on the web page. And some of it's commenting, but some of it is actually hidden text, and it's meant to only be revealed in certain circumstances. And that is what's going on here. They came up with some very clever ways. And if you really want to know the details, I recommend you read the article because it goes in and gives proof of concepts for how you would do this in HTML and CSS. And it's quite clever. But just to summarize, you could put these tags on sections of text on a document, and you can say that under certain circumstances, this text is to be hidden. And then you can reveal it again later. And that is what's going on here. They've basically figured out that when you view an email as it comes to you, it's interpreted one way. If you forward that email, the rendering of that page, not just the text that, hey, check this out, I'm forwarding it to you. The forwarded part that has this HTML and CSS in it, it's in a different context, which is to say that the email client that is rendering that to you and showing you this text and reading the HTML and reading the CSS and deciding how to format it makes a different decision because the context has changed and therefore reveals text that was not in the original email, because in the forwarded situation, the context is different. And some of these little embedded tags, these CSS tags that tell whether or not to show or hide text, changes. And they've formatted it just so that when it's forwarded, it's revealed, and when it's viewed as the original received email, it is not. So that is extremely clever. And all I can say is, I think we can do things about this. As an engineer, I always think there's a technical solution to this, but I think we need to get away from allowing dynamic things like this to occur in certain situations. Like it should be static. So we should not be allowing some of these contextual decisions on whether to show or hide text to happen in things like emails, for example, because those really should be static. They should not be changing. And this has happened in other cases, like with JavaScript. There are subsets of JavaScript that are more secure and safe. And so when you're doing, trying to do very secure JavaScript, you don't use the full complement of all JavaScript available. You only use a certain subset, and you've got compilers that enforce this. And so I think there are ways that we could come up with some standards we could derive that would basically say, okay, in these situations, we do not allow any dynamic aspects of CSS to operate here to prevent these kind of things from happening. But anyway, in the meantime, just be aware that this is happening. So in any case like this is one very particular situation, but in any situation where you're getting an email from your boss and she says, hey, go do this, and it sounds funny, check with your boss. Just make sure, do an end around, and don't reply to that email. Pick a different channel, text them or talk to them or whatever and say, hey, I just got this email from you, and I just wanted to make absolutely sure you wanted me to send that $1 million to this account. Is that really what you want me to do? And find a side channel and verify if it looks at all fishy, because these kind of things happen. This is just one instance, but there have been several other very interesting scenarios where social engineering or actual software engineering is used to trick people like this. So when in doubt, always double check. All right, next up, this is from Bruce Schneier's blog. And it's kind of a long article, but it's really important. We really dodged a major bullet recently, and it did not get a lot of attention because their bad thing didn't happen, but it could have been honestly catastrophic. So this is an article from Bruce. I'm going to read the entire thing because I think it's very important. Last week, and I think this was actually 2 or 3 weeks ago at this point, the internet dodged a major nation-state attack that would have had catastrophic cybersecurity repercussions worldwide. It's a catastrophe that didn't happen, so it won't get much attention, but it should. There's an important moral to the story of the attack and its discovery. The security of the global internet depends on countless obscure pieces of software written and maintained by even more obscure, unpaid, distractible, and sometimes vulnerable volunteers. It's an untenable situation and one that is being exploited by malicious actors, yet precious little is being done to remedy it. Programmers dislike doing extra work. If they can find already written code that does what they want, they're going to use it rather than recreate that functionality. These code repositories, called libraries, are hosted on sites like GitHub. There are libraries for everything: displaying objects in 3D, spell checking, performing complex mathematics, managing an e-commerce shopping cart, moving files around the internet. Everything. Libraries are essential to modern programming. They're the building blocks of complex software. The modularity they provide makes software projects tractable. Everything you use contains dozens of these libraries, some commercial, some open source and freely available. They are essential to the functionality of finished software and to its security. You'll likely never heard of an open source library called Utils, short for utilities, but it's on hundreds of millions of computers. It's probably on yours. It's certainly in whatever corporate or organizational network you use. It's a freely available library that does data compression. It's important in the same way that hundreds of other similar obscure libraries are important. Many open source libraries like Utils are maintained by volunteers. In the case of Utils, it's one person, named Lassie Collin. He has been in charge of the Utils since he wrote it in 2009, and at least in 2022, he's had some long-term mental issues, and there's a link to an article, I assume, that explains what that means. And in parentheses, Bruce says, to be clear, he is not to blame for this story. This is a systems problem. Beginning in at least 2021, Collin was personally targeted. We don't know by whom, but we have account names: Jian Tan, Jigar Kumar, Dennis Enns. They're not real names. They pressured Collin to transfer control over Utils. In early 2023, they succeeded. Tan spent the year slowly incorporating a backdoor into Utils, disabling systems that might discover his actions, laying the groundwork, and finally adding the complete backdoor earlier this year. On March 25th, Hans Jansen, another fake name, tried to push the various Unix systems to upgrade to the new version of Utils. And everyone was poised to do so. It's a routine update. In the span of a few weeks, it would have been part of both Debian and Red Hat Linux, which run on the vast majority of servers on the internet. But on March 29th, another unpaid volunteer, Andreas Frund, a real person who works for Microsoft but who is doing this in his spare time, noticed something weird about how much processing the new version of Utils was doing. It's the sort of thing that could be easily overlooked and even more easily ignored. But for whatever reason, Frund tracked down the weirdness and discovered the back door. It's a masterful piece of work. It affects the SSH, or Secure Shell Remote Login Protocol, basically by adding a hidden piece of functionality that requires a specific key to enable. Someone with that key can use the backdoored SSH to upload and execute an arbitrary piece of code on the target machine. SSH runs as root, so that code could have done anything. Let your imagination run wild. This isn't something a hacker just whips up. This backdoor is the result of a years-long engineering effort. The ways the code evades detection in source form, how it lies dormant and undetected until activated, and its immense power and flexibility give credence to the widely held assumption that a major nation-state is behind this. If it had been discovered, it probably would have eventually ended up on every computer and server on the internet. Though it's unclear whether the backdoor would have affected Windows and Mac OS, it would have worked on Linux. Remember in 2020 when Russia planted a backdoor into SolarWinds that affected 14,000 networks? That seemed like a lot, but this would have been orders of magnitude more damaging. And again, the catastrophe was averted only because a volunteer stumbled on it. And it was possible in the first place only because the first unpaid volunteer, someone who turned out to be a national security single point of failure, was personally targeted and exploited by a foreign actor. This is no way to run critical national infrastructure, and yet here we are. This was an attack on our software supply chain. This attack subverted software dependencies. The SolarWinds attack targeted the update process. Other attacks target system design, development, and deployment. Such attacks are becoming increasingly common and effective and are also increasingly the weapon of choice of nation-states. It's impossible to count how many of these single points of failure are in our computer systems, and there's no way to know how many of the unpaid and unappreciated maintainers of critical software libraries are vulnerable to pressure. Again, don't blame them. Blame the industry that is happy to exploit their unpaid labor. Or how many more have accidentally created exploited vulnerabilities? How many other coercion attempts are ongoing? A dozen? 100? It seems impossible that the Utils operation was a unique instance. Solutions are hard. Banning open source won't work. It's precisely because Utils is open source that an engineer discovered the problem in time. Banning software libraries won't work either. Modern software can't function without them. For years, security engineers have been pushing something called Software Bill of Materials, or SBOM, which I've talked about on this show before, and I've actually interviewed Alan Friedman on this show about it, which was a great episode, and I really need to get him back on the show. But anyway, Software Bill of Materials, which is an ingredients list of sorts, so that when one of these packages is compromised, network owners at least know if they're vulnerable. Think of it basically like an ingredients list for software, like the mandatory labels on the side of food that tell you what all stuff is in the food you're eating. The industry hates this idea and has been fighting it for years, but perhaps the tide is turning. The fundamental problem is that tech companies dislike spending extra money even more than programmers dislike doing extra work. If there's free software out there, they're going to use it, and they're not going to do much in-house security testing. Easier software development equals lower costs equals more profits. The market economy rewards this sort of insecurity. We need some sustainable ways to fund open source projects that become de facto critical infrastructure. Public shaming can help here. The Open Source Security Foundation, or OSSF, founded in 2022 after another critical vulnerability in another open source library, Log4j, was discovered, addresses this problem. The big tech companies pledged $30 million in funding after the critical Log4j supply chain vulnerability, but they never delivered. And they are still happy to make use of all this free labor and free resources, as a recent Microsoft anecdote indicates, and that is another link. The companies benefiting from these freely available libraries need to actually step up, and the government can force them to. There's a lot of tech that could be applied to this problem if corporations were willing to spend the money. Liabilities will help. The Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency's, or CISA's, Secure by Design initiative will help, and CISA is finally partnering with OSSF on this problem. Certainly, the security of these libraries needs to be part of any broad government cybersecurity initiative. We got extraordinarily lucky this time, but maybe we can learn from the catastrophe that didn't happen. Like the power grid, communications network, and transportation systems, the software supply chain is critical infrastructure, part of national security, and vulnerable to foreign attack. The U.S. government needs to recognize this as a national security problem and start treating it as such. So, yeah, I don't think I would actually add or argue with any of that. I'm a big supporter of SBOM, Software Bill of Materials. Again, I'm all about transparency and information and data, and making all these things human and machine readable so that we can have tools that find these things. So let's say one of these libraries, like this Utils or whatever it was, version 5.3.25 or whatever, is found to have been hacked or is vulnerable or has a serious security vulnerability in it, then everybody should be able to push a button on all of their systems and say, okay, what software am I running right now that has that vulnerability in it, and quickly find out so they can get that stuff updated. That is what Software Bill of Materials is all about. And I'm a software engineer. When you're making software, you have to specify when you're building the software, okay, I want to use that version of that library and that version of that library and another version of this library and put these all together and then build my software application based on that. The software tools know exactly what's in there. It's not that much of a stretch to say, okay, why don't we record a manifest of everything that went into building this and then make that manifest available to the people who buy or use this software so that we can keep it secure when something like this is found. It's doable, and we need to do it. But I thought this story was fascinating. There's a lot of really interesting details. If you want to dig into this, find the article or similar articles But it's just fascinating, the software engineering that went into this, as well as the social engineering. I will be very curious if we ever find out who was behind this effort. Obviously, we'd like to jump to the immediate bad guys, right? North Korea, China, Russia, whatever. It could be the NSA, or it could have been GCHQ. So anyway, if that ever comes up, I will let you know what we find. All right, moving on. This is from Engadget, and it's about how companies are doing everything they can to slurp up data for their AI training. OpenAI and Google trained their AI models on text transcribed from YouTube videos, potentially violating creators' copyrights, according to the New York Times. The report, which describes the lengths that OpenAI, Google, and Meta have gone to in order to maximize the amount of data they can feed into their AIs, cites numerous people with knowledge of the company's practices. It comes just days after YouTube CEO Neil Mohan said in an interview with Bloomberg Originals that OpenAI's alleged use of YouTube videos to train its new text-to-video generator, Sora, would go against the platform's policies. According to the New York Times, OpenAI used its whisper speech recognition tool to transcribe more than 1 million hours of YouTube videos, which were then used to train GPT-4. The information previously reported that OpenAI had used YouTube videos and podcasts to train the two AI systems. OpenAI President Greg Brockman was reportedly among the people on this team. Per Google's rules, quote, unauthorized scraping or downloading of YouTube content, unquote, is not allowed, Matt Bryant, a spokesperson for Google, told New York Times, also saying that the company was unaware of any such use by OpenAI. The report, however, claims that there were people at Google who knew but did not take action against OpenAI because Google was using YouTube videos to train its own AI models. Google told the New York Times that it only does so with videos from creators who have agreed to this. Now, I'm just going to stop there. The article goes on. But this whole consent thing, notice and consent thing, is often abused, right? So by agreeing to this, what that could mean is you post a video on YouTube and it says, hey, would you like to add, closed captioning to your video? Oh, sure, I'll like to do that. But somewhere in there was a little asterisk or something that says, to find out the privacy policy implications of this or the copyright implications of this, click here. I doubt it was even that explicit. But that could have been all it took to, quote unquote, agree. So the important takeaway here is that these companies, these AI companies and the people behind them, are going to great lengths to slurp up data for training their AI models, because that is what makes them better. That is what makes them do more stuff. The more data you can feed into these things, the more things they, quote unquote, know. Or really what it amounts to is the more examples they have to draw from, because all these things are taking examples of things it already sees, looking for patterns, and then recreating things based on those patterns. But what these companies are trying so hard to do is differentiate their stuff to make theirs better, more marketable than their competitors by saying, we have all this data that they don't have. Because certainly like Facebook and Google have all sorts of content posted by creators on their platforms that they can mine for AI data that they can deny to these other AI companies, not really through legal methods or even copyright, but just by saying that if you scrape our stuff, that violates the terms of service. But of course, they have access to all their stuff, and they have somehow gotten their users and creators to agree to let them use that data. So this brought up an anecdote that I always thought was fascinating, that you may have known about and forgotten about, or maybe never even knew about. But back in the day, before we had smartphones and internet access on all our devices, if we wanted to get information on something, if we wanted to look up a phone number, for example, or an address, you would use a service called 411. At least in the United States, that was the number. You dialed 411 and you can ask for information, usually get a phone number. And that almost always cost money. This was yet another service provided by cellular providers, for example, or phone companies in general, just to make more money. And so they usually charged a lot. Well, Google came out with something they called Goog 411 back in the day that was totally free and gave the same service and gave really good service. You could get some really good information through Goog 411. It was totally free. The entire reason Google did this was they were trying to, at the time, train their voice recognition systems. And so they needed a lot of vocal input to do that. And it always helped to have vocal information that was kind of tightly constrained, so it was easy for you to figure out what you were hearing and how to process it. And so they gave away this free service, Goog 411, in the background to train their voice recognition systems. And once they had enough data for that, once they had enough information, they just shut Goog 411 down, because it was always about them training their voice recognition systems, not about providing a nice free service. Now, I will say that there's a lot of nuanced debate about what we should allow AI systems, open or proprietary, to be able to access and train themselves on. There's a lot of people saying, for example, that we don't want to limit what we give the AI, because if we do, that's naturally going to make them skewed. That's going to skew their knowledge base, might even bias their knowledge base or give them blind spots, right? For example, let's say we only trained AI on novels that were in the public domain, or movies, transcripts of movies that were in the public domain, or video in the public domain, whatever. That means that you would have to go back to the early 1900s. So it would ignore all written knowledge, but over the last 100 years or more. So anyway, if you listen to any of the Twitch shows like This Week in Tech or This Week in Google, especially This Week in Google, they debate this endlessly. If you want to go back and listen to some of those arguments. But there is one practical thing here. If you own a website like a blog or something like that, and you don't like the idea of these AI systems snarfing up your data for their training, you can add some information to a robots.txt file that would at least request that these companies like ChatGPT and Google's AI not use your content for their AI training. I'm not going to even put a link on the show notes. This is kind of a specific thing. But if you search on AI and robots.txt for scraping, you'll find this. All right, speaking of AI, this one's from Lifehacker, and it's about how to turn off Meta AI on Facebook, Instagram, Messenger, and WhatsApp. Though from my reading of this article, there actually wasn't a way to do it. So let me read briefly from this article. Generative AI is an exciting, powerful, controversial new technology. And if Mark Zuckerberg is anything to go by, it's not going away anytime soon. If you use any of Meta's mobile apps, including Facebook, Instagram, Messenger, or WhatsApp, you've probably already noticed the new Meta AI integration freshly embedded into them as of late. It's all part of a new rollout for Meta AI's latest large language model, Llama 3. And Llama is a takeoff on LLM, large language model. That's where Llama came from. But while Llama 3 is more powerful than prior versions, these new buttons and prompts make it harder than ever to ignore. Let's say you're not yet convinced on AI and want to keep doing your searches and scrolling the old-fashioned way. Can you turn the new Meta AI integration off? And how do you go about doing it? First, know thine enemy. Microsoft's AI assistant has actually been around since September 2023, but the most recent update puts it directly in the search boxes and sometimes even feeds of apps, including Facebook and Instagram. The integration is a little different from app to app, but in general, clicking on the search box or sometimes the chat button in a Meta app will now show an iridescent rainbow circle with a prompt next to it saying, "Ask Meta AI anything." If you take Meta up on the offer, you'll be able to have Meta AI answer writing or image generation prompts, which are classic AI assistant features. The app will even give you a few suggestions, and with Llama 3, it can also now generate GIFs or GIFs and return real-time search results from either Google or Bing. The problem with these functions is that they're mixed in with non-AI features, so it can be a little confusing to tell them apart. Now, I'm actually going to cut the article short there. It goes on to explain what it looks like and how it's used in all these various Meta apps. And then, at least from my reading, maybe I missed something, but as I'm looking at each of these things, they basically come back and say, and how do you turn it off? Well, you really kind of can't. So I didn't really see any positive ways to disable this. But at least it does explain, especially if you want to get visuals on this, to look at the images, it explains how to recognize where you see this. And again, I guess apparently it's a little iridescent circle. So for now, at least Meta is labeling these things, so you kind of know maybe when it's being used, but they could disable that or change that at any time. So really what I want you to know is that this is happening, and I honestly personally believe that consumers should have the ability to first know where AI is being used and then be able to easily and globally disable it if they want to. And of course, that's going to require a law, folks. Now, AI is powerful and it has many, many useful things that it can do, but it still should be an informed choice. And also, as I said recently on the show, the use of AI generally requires a server to be involved because of the computing power required, which means that in a lot of cases, things that normally would just happen locally on your phone now have to go to the cloud, which, as we know, is the name for someone else's computer. So that becomes a privacy problem as well. All right, let's move on. I still have a lot to get to, though. A lot of the remaining articles are pretty short. All right, this next is from Bitdefender, and it's about an LG WebOS problem. That's the operating system on LG televisions. And just briefly, it says, we have found several issues affecting LG WebOS TV operating system versions 4 through 7 running on LG TVs. These vulnerabilities let us gain root access on the TV. And again, root access is basically full admin. You can do whatever you want. After bypassing the authorization mechanism. Although the vulnerable service is intended for LAN access only, in other words, it should only be visible inside your home network, not from the outside. Shodan, the search engine for internet-connected devices, identified over 91,000 devices that exposed this service to the internet, and I would love to know how that happened. Bitdefender researchers discovered a vulnerability that lets an attacker bypass the authorization mechanism in WebOS versions 4 through 7. By setting a variable, the attacker can add an extra user to the TV set. Another vulnerability allows attackers to elevate the access they gained in the first step to root and fully take over the device. LG has fixed the reported issues prior to the publication of this research. The LG Product Security Response Center security advisories for the reported vulnerabilities are available here. And of course, that's a link that you would have to go to. LG also released automatic and manual updates for the affected firmware versions, and we advise that vulnerable TV set model owners take action immediately. So, yeah, I guess if you have an LG TV that is running one of those versions of the operating system, which probably is just most recent models, make sure that you have it set up for automatic software updates and you go check for an update and apply any that are waiting. But I'm going to say this again. I never connect my TVs to the internet, period, full stop. I keep them dumb and disconnected. I use a separate Apple TV streaming box to access things like Netflix and other smart TV functions. I never use the smart functions built into my television. And so therefore, I honestly don't care about security updates. My TVs are basically air-gapped. They're as dumb as they were the day they came out of the box and will never be updated, but I don't care because they're not on the internet. They're not on the network, not even in my local home network, so they really can't be attacked. So I don't care about those updates. But I do have to say, I wonder how much longer it will be before these TV manufacturers don't let you use the television without connecting it to the internet first. A lot of these TVs, especially these low-cost TVs like TCL and some of these others, sell these TVs like at or near cost because they're going to make money day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year by monetizing your data. And while I'm guessing most people probably do connect their TVs to the internet, that's not a big problem. I could definitely see where someone's going to say, hey, wait a minute. We basically have to force the user to connect these things to the internet, or we should not let them use it at all. I'm waiting for that day to come, and maybe it's already happened. I haven't bought a smart TV for a few years, but I would not be surprised if it comes to that. So anyway, kind of speaking of that, let's move on to this article about Roku, which makes TVs of their own, and I think they also partner with TCL and some others, and of course they have their own streaming boxes. But they recently suffered a major cyber attack. On Friday, which I think was April 12th, Roku confirmed a cyber attack compromised roughly 576,000 accounts. It marks the second such cyber attack to affect the company, which compromised a smaller number of accounts earlier this year. Roku says it detected an increase in unusual account activity earlier this year. After checking into it, the company found that bad actors had compromised about 15,000 Roku accounts. This wasn't due to a security breach in Roku systems, however. Instead, these bad actors obtained the usernames and passwords for these accounts through third parties, likely through sources that leak stolen credentials online. They didn't necessarily know these usernames and passwords were for Roku accounts. Rather, they engaged in what's known as credential stuffing, an automated process where they try to log into popular account types with stolen credentials until they land on a winning combination. As it happens, they landed on an initial 15,000 accounts before moving on to larger wins. Roku says it continued to investigate following this incident and discovered another 5,600,000 compromised accounts in the process. Roku still thinks their credentials for these accounts were taken from somewhere else, and even suggests that they might have been taken from accounts where they had used the same username and password. As such, the company likely doesn't have a security issue at this time. As Roku has over 80 million active accounts, the chances yours was among the fraction of percent of users affected is small. Still, Roku says it has reset passwords for all users affected in this attack. If bad actors made a payment using your account, Roku has refunded you. The company says no financial information was breached in the attack, so you can hold on to your credit cards for now. The company also enabled two-factor authentication for all affected accounts. This is a good thing. 2FA, or two-factor authentication, requires access to a trusted device or phone number to finish logging in after entering your password. Even if your credentials leak online, bad actors won't be able to log into your account without access to, say, your smartphone, significantly reducing the chances of a breach. If you don't have 2FA set up on your Roku account, or any account that offers it for that matter, make sure you do so ASAP. It's lucky the attacks didn't affect more users, but the incident shines a light on how important it is to be on top of your digital security. Simple steps like using strong and unique passwords for all accounts and setting up 2FA wherever possible can prevent your accounts from being breached. So my take on this, don't use Roku. And not really because of this, because like the article says, this wasn't really necessarily Roku's fault if what they're saying is correct. Really, it's the fault of a bunch of people reusing passwords, and those passwords getting leaked in other data breaches and this credential stuffing technique, which takes advantage of the fact that those people use the same username and passwords on multiple accounts. But Roku is definitely focused more lately on monetizing their users as a source of revenue. They've been kind of loss leaders in terms of turning out really low-priced products because they're making that money up on your data. And in fact, I just talked about this a few weeks ago, and this is kind of related to what I was just theorizing about TVs requiring you to connect to the internet. Roku recently pushed out a software update that required you to accept their new terms of service before you could continue using their product. There was no way to not do it. You had to click OK, which then meant you've agreed to it, and you actually had to go back and send them a letter in writing within 30 days to change your mind. And this was about forced arbitration versus lawsuits. It was really scummy. And again, that just kind of says bad things about the company in general. So if I were you, I would not be using Roku products. Okay, I've got a handful of articles left. I'm going to try to crank through them here. Most of them are short, and most of them are positive. First up, this is from Mac Rumors, and it's about Twitter wanting to charge a small fee for new users. And here's why. Social media platform X, formerly Twitter, will soon begin charging new users a quote-unquote small fee for posting content and liking, replying, and bookmarking tweets, according to Elon Musk. X Daily News, a feed that posts X updates, today noticed that text strings on the website have been updated to mention a small annual fee that new users will need to pay in order to access the social network. Musk said in response that the fee for new users is, quote, the only way to curb the relentless onslaught of bots, unquote. The fee was previously tested in New Zealand and the Philippines, and Musk says that it is applicable only to those who are new to Twitter. When a new user signs up, the user will need to pay the fee or wait for 3 months to be able to engage on the network. It's unclear how the policy will stop spam accounts and bots, as spammers will be able to pay the fee or simply create multiple accounts and wait to be able to post. Regular users, meanwhile, could be discouraged from using X due to the extra step and the fact that other social networks are free. So real quick, my take on this may not be the proper solution to this problem, but we need to start implementing some sort of speed bumps on social media and email and messaging as well to make it harder for bots to do what they do. And there are various ideas that have been batted around for this. We kind of need to try them all and see which ones make the most sense. But basically, you want to find some mechanism, some requirement, some bit of friction that makes it hard for bots to do what they do while not really interfering with what regular people tend to do. For one thing, for example, bots tend to come and go quickly. A lot of them get created and then get abandoned, for example, because a lot of them get blocked, so they just create new ones. So the fact that you can quickly and easily create a bunch of free accounts is a problem. Bots also tend to post a lot more stuff. And so implementing things like, just charging like $1. If X was going to charge every new user $1 before they could do anything other than read, then that would actually kill probably a lot of bots. Because if you want to create 1 million bots, that's $1 million. Where before it was completely free. But then you got to collect payment. So do you allow Bitcoin and Monero? Because otherwise you're going to get in a KYC situation or a know your customer situation where you can no longer be anonymous or even pseudonymous if you've got to give up payment details and just to have a Twitter account. So while I understand the charging thing, that could be a problem, but instead of doing it for everybody all the time, maybe you can do it based on a sliding scale. For example, most people may post, a few things a day. So maybe if you want to post more than 20 times a day, then maybe you have to start charging pennies for that. And if you want to charge more than 100 times a day, then maybe start charging dollars for that. So for most people, it won't affect you at all. You don't have to enter credit card information. They don't have to go this whole KYC route. And for most people, it doesn't affect anything. But for these bot accounts, maybe it's enough friction to keep them from, doing the more abusive things. And this is really the reason I think why Signal required you to have a phone number to set up an account, because phone numbers are a very limited quantity. It's hard for spam bots to create these unlimited numbers of phone numbers, because phone numbers are in short supply and they're owned in chunks by various providers. So that kind of forced the limitation of creating accounts, and it forced you to be a real person, because it's just really not very practical to create 1 million bots with 1 million temporary throwaway phone numbers. So anyway, I understand why they're doing this. I'm not sure this is the right way to do it, but I wanted to put this out there as a thought experiment about, ways that we could be thinking about curbing the abuse that comes with bots, and finding ways to do it that don't really impact the privacy or the convenience of regular users. All right, so next up, this is from Wired, and it's about DuckDuckGo. Most of DuckDuckGo's stuff to date, I think everything has been free, but they have now come out with a very interesting triple play service that I wanted to talk about. So anyway, this is an excerpt from a Wired article. For more than a decade, DuckDuckGo has rallied against Google's extensive online tracking. Now the privacy-focused web search and browser company has another target in its sights: the sprawling, messy web of data brokers that collect and sell your data every single day. Today, and this was last week, Google is launching a new browser-based tool that automatically scans data broker websites for your name and address and requests that they be removed. Gabriel Weinberg, the company's founder and CEO, says the personal information removal product is the first of its kind, where users don't have to submit any of their details to the tool's owners. The service will make the request for your information to be removed and then continually check if new records have been added, Weinberg says. And a quote from Weinberg, quote, "We've been doing it to automate it completely end-to-end so you don't have to do anything," unquote. The personal information removal tool is part of DuckDuckGo's first subscription service called Privacy Pro. It is bundled with the firm's first VPN and identity theft restoration service. Weinberg says the subscription offering, which is initially available only in the US for $9.99 per month or $99.99 per year, is part of an effort to add to the privacy-focused tools it provides within its web browser and search engine. The data broker industry is a far-reaching $200+ billion market, which collects, buys, and sells as much information as it can. The lack of comprehensive privacy laws in the U.S. allows companies to easily trade everything from people's names and addresses to financial data and specific GPS coordinates gathered from your phone. The recently proposed American Privacy Rights Act, the APRA, if passed, would create a new registry of data brokers and give people some European-style privacy rights. And that was parenthetical. You can click on those links in the story if you want more info. DuckDuckGo's personal information removal tool, for now at least, is taking the privacy fight to the people search websites, which allow you to look up names, addresses, and some details of family members. However, Weinberg says DuckDuckGo has created it so the company isn't gathering details about you and is built on technology from Removally, Removally, which the company acquired in 2022. Ahead of its launch, the company demonstrated how the system works and some of the engineering efforts that went into its creation. On the surface, the removal tool is straightforward. You access it through the company's browser and enter some information about yourself, such as your name, year of birth, and any addresses. It then scans 53 data broker websites for results linked to you and requests those results to be wiped. And it says here parenthetically that all 53 data brokers included have opt-out schemes that allow people to make requests. So I wonder if they excluded ones that didn't. Anyway, a dashboard shows updates about what has been removed and when it will next scan those websites again in case new records have been added. So this goes on. I'll just kind of summarize quickly. They ask you for some basic personal info and they store it locally only and encrypted, so it's not sent to DuckDuckGo. And then they search these sites for your info. And they do this by, a lot of these sites have in their search mechanisms, the URL that results from doing a search, like, will be search for / Carrie Parker / something. So they've basically looked at the formatting of some of those URLs and some of the APIs involved, I guess, to automate that process where they automatically search these sites for that information to see if it comes up. And if so, also automates the process for sending a request to remove that information and then keeps track of what happens. So I think that's pretty cool. If you want to read more about that, check the article. But I also wanted to let you know that I'm currently doing some research on several of these data deletion services, like Delete Me and Easy Opt-outs, and I will look at this one as well. And honestly, I'm kind of guessing that the optimal strategy for a lot of people might involve more than one of these tools. Like, I'm not sure any one of these is a silver bullet. So I plan to do some research, pick 2 or 3 of these tools that I think look to be promising. Then I will sign up for them and see what happens. And then I will let you guys know what I find. Okay, lightning around here, a few articles here about various government agencies that are trying to protect our data here in the U.S. Since we don't have any privacy laws. First one's from the Federal Trade Commission. Cerebral Incorporated has agreed to an order that will restrict how the company can use or disclose sensitive consumer data and require it to provide consumers with a simple way to cancel services to settle a Federal Trade Commission charges that the telehealth firm failed to secure and protect sensitive health data. Under the proposed order filed by the Department of Justice upon notification and referral from the FTC, Cerebral will be required to pay more than $7 million over charges that it disclosed consumers' sensitive personal health information and other sensitive data to third parties for advertising purposes and failed to honor its easy cancellation promises. The order must be approved by the court before it can go into effect. Cerebral provides online mental health and related services on a negative option basis, which means consumers are automatically charged unless they cancel those services. Consumers who sign up and use the company's services provide detailed personal data, including their home and email addresses, birth dates, medical and prescription histories, payment account and driver's license numbers, as well as information about their treatment plans, pharmacy and health insurance plans, and other personal data, such as their religious or political beliefs or sexual orientation. To get consumers to sign up for the company's services and provide detailed personal data, the company claimed that it offered, quote, safe, secure, and discreet, unquote, services, and that the user's data would be kept confidential, according to the complaint. The complaint charges that Cerebral failed to clearly disclose that it would be sharing consumers' sensitive data with third parties for advertising and buried disclaimers about its data sharing practices in dense privacy policies. In fact, according to the complaint, the company claimed in many instances that it would not share users' data for marketing purposes without obtaining consumers' consent. Specifically, the complaint charges that Cerebral provided sensitive information of nearly 3.2 million consumers to third parties such as LinkedIn, Snapchat, and TikTok by using or integrating tracking tools on its website or apps. These tracking tools collect and send data to third parties so they can provide advertising, data analytics, and other services to the owner of the websites or apps. Through the use of tracking tools, Cerebral gave third parties personal data about its users, including names, medical and prescription histories, and blah, blah, blah. We just talked about that. In addition to its privacy and data security failures, the complaint alleges that Cerebral also violated the something or something Act by failing to clearly disclose all material terms of the Cerebral's cancellation policies before charging consumers. Despite promising that consumers could cancel anytime, Cerebral required its clients to navigate a complex, multi-step, and often multi-day process to cancel. The complaint alleges that the company continued to charge consumers while it slow-walked consumers' cancellation requests, which cost consumers millions in additional charges. When it first implemented an easier cancellation button in April 2020, the company removed it after only 2 weeks at the CEO's direction after seeing cancellations rise, according to the complaint. All right, and one more, and this is from The Verge, and it's about the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. The CFPB wants to propose new regulations that would require data brokers to comply with the Fair Credit Reporting Act. In a speech at the White House earlier this month, CFPB Director Rohit Chopra said the agency is looking into policies that ensure greater accountability for companies to buy and sell consumer data, in keeping with an executive order President Joe Biden issued in late February. Chopra said the agency is considering proposals that would define data brokers that sell certain types of data as consumer reporting agencies, thereby requiring those companies to comply with the Fair Credit Reporting Act, or the FCRA. The statute bans sharing certain kinds of data, for example, your credit report, with entities unless they serve a specific purpose outlined in the law. For example, if the report is used for employment purposes or to extend a line of credit to someone. The CFPB views the buying and selling of consumer data as a national security issue, not just a matter of privacy. Chopra mentioned 3 massive data breaches, the 2015 Anthem leak, the 2017 Equifax hack, and the 2018 Marriott breach, as examples of foreign adversaries illicitly obtaining Americans' personal data. And this is a quote from Chopra, quote, When Americans' health information, financial information, and even their travel whereabouts can be assembled into detailed dossiers, it's no surprise that this raises risks when it comes to safety and security. But the focus on high-profile hacks obscures a more pervasive, totally legal phenomenon: data brokers' ability to sell detailed personal information to anyone who's willing to pay for it. Citing the February executive order, Chopra noted that data brokers can sell data to, quote, countries of concern or entities controlled by those countries, and it can land in the hands of foreign intelligence services, militaries, and other companies controlled by foreign governments, unquote. In other words, instead of hacking hotel chains and credit reporting bureaus to get access to millions of Americans' personal data, intelligence agencies can buy information that is just as detailed, if not more so. And another quote from Chopra, quote, for example, data brokers can facilitate the targeting of individuals by allowing entities to purchase lists that match multiple categories like intelligence and counterterrorism with substance abuse, or heavy drinker, or even behind on bills. In other contexts, entities can purchase records for pennies per person, allowing relatively small investments to be leveraged into mass collection, unquote. Put another way, the White House is concerned that the U.S.'s adversaries, most explicitly China, can use America's data to identify targets for blackmail and surveillance. U.S. government agencies, too, rely on data brokers to keep an eye on Americans. In 2022, the American Civil Liberties Union published a series of documents that showed how the Department of Homeland Security used location data to track the movements of millions of cell phones and the people who own them within the U.S. So yeah, I don't have a whole lot to add to that. I will say there was one more article I didn't get a chance to read today about the FCC. We're just running long on time. And it was an interesting kind of article about how the federal communications industry is basically looking to regulate cars because car companies are basically becoming what we call MVNOs, or mobile virtual network operators, by basically providing cell service in their cars. And so that was another novel approach. I will at least put the link in the show notes if you want to read that article. But basically, we don't have privacy laws in the U.S., so this is what we've come up with to try to rein in some of this horrible data collection that's going on and sharing. So the bottom line is we need a privacy law. And that American Privacy Rights Act, the ARPA, is something that is being bandied about and is something to look into. I've not yet gotten the details on that yet, but apparently it's at least a good step forward. So keep an eye out for that and tell your representatives that you want that or something like that to get passed. Speaking of which, I'm not going to get into this now, but another news item that came up here just recently was the Senate passed the expanded Section 702 FISA authorization, which means almost certainly that President Biden will sign it. So that is a really, really bad thing. Maybe I could try to bring somebody on to talk about that in depth. It was very, very disappointing. I actually watched the House debate on this where they were trying to put amendments on it. One of them, called the Briggs Amendment, would have required a warrant to look at any Americans' data, which I think makes total sense. And as they were voting on it, it was tied. And they had already gone way over the time allotted for voting on this amendment, which they apparently do all the time. And so it had gone way over time. They were still waiting for votes, and it was currently tied, at which point the person in charge gavelled and said, okay, that's it, we're done. It's tied, so it doesn't pass. That was very, very disappointing. But okay, that's enough of the news. We're already running long. Let's get to my tip of the week. And this goes all the way back to the AT&T thing, but really it goes back to all the data breaches that have happened. I had written about this on my blog years ago. It's in my book. I bring it up on this show every once in a while, but it's time just to bring it up formally again. And that is, please freeze your credit report. If you live in the United States, there is really just no reason not to do this. It used to cost money. They used to charge you to do this. It used to be more painful to do this. It has gotten much, much easier to implement. It is absolutely now free to do in any state of the United States. There is really just no reason not to do this. So you should go to each of the three main major credit bureaus in the United States. That's Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion. My blog article on this, and it's linked to for the tip of the week, will point you to several articles. Pick the one you like that walk through how to do this. It's very straightforward. It's very simple. Unfortunately, you do have to do it with each of these three. And you might also want to consider doing it with the fourth largest one, which a lot of people don't know about. It's called Innovis. You might want to go ahead and freeze your credit with them as well. And as you're doing this, beware of a very common bait and switch. These companies make money off of providing your credit report to anybody who is willing to pay for it for reasons at least that are restricted by that Fair Credit Reporting Act. But that's how they make their money. And so they don't like it when you freeze your credit. So when you go to try to freeze it, they will try to distract you with this thing called a credit lock, which works almost exactly the same way. They will tout it as being better. In some cases, this is instantaneous, where a freeze may take a day or two. Don't let that dissuade you. These services, for the most part, cost money. They're subscription services, so they're making money off you this way, since they can't make money off you the other way when you freeze your credit report. And it's just a distraction. It's a red herring. Don't go for the bait and switch. Make sure you actually freeze your credit. That is totally free. Thawing your credit, should you ever need to do so, is also free. All these services now have ways for you to do this kind of in one step. So you can say, okay, I'm applying for a credit card. I know that the company that I'm applying for this credit card for uses Equifax. So I can go to Equifax and say, I want you to thaw my credit report for 3 days starting tomorrow. And so you don't even have to thaw it and then go back and refreeze it. In most cases, you could just give it a time period and it will automatically refreeze when that time period is up. And like I said, you don't have to necessarily unfreeze all three. Whenever you're doing something that requires a credit pull, find out which credit service they use, and you can just thaw that one. Now, there is something else called a fraud alert, which you can consider. It's actually completely independent of a credit freeze. You can have them both. And they work kind of differently. A fraud alert basically requires them to gather more identity information before opening any new credit in your name, which you'd think they would just do as a matter of purpose anyway. But anyway, if you put a fraud alert on there, that would just make it that much harder for someone to open credit in your name. It doesn't prevent it really, though, so it's not nearly as good as a freeze. But there's no reason you can't do it. And the nice thing with a fraud alert, for whatever reason, is unlike credit freeze, if you do a fraud alert on one of them, they'll pass that on to the rest of them and it will apply to all of them. That's kind of weird. However, fraud alerts generally only last for a year, at which point you can renew them as many times as you like. If, however, you have been a documented victim of identity theft, in other words, you filed a police report and or a report with identitytheft.gov in the U.S., you will qualify for an extended fraud alert, which will last 7 years. But when it's all said and done, the real thing you want to do here is you want to freeze your credit. But realize that, even a credit freeze has its limitations. For example, it doesn't affect any companies with which you already have a credit relationship. So if you've got a Citibank credit card, for example, that's not going to necessarily prevent somebody from opening a new Citibank credit card if they can convince Citibank that they are you, and then have that card sent to their home and charge up a bunch of stuff and leave you stuck with the bill. Also, there are other things that require, or maybe that's a strong word, other situations where credit reports can be pulled besides getting a credit card or a loan. For example, if you are renting an apartment or renting a house, oftentimes they will pull your credit report. Some employers will also pull your credit report before offering you a job. A lot of utility companies, electric companies, gas companies, whatever, when you first sign up for service, will pull a credit report on you. So know that there will be some other scenarios where you might need to thaw your credit report, but it is totally, totally worth it. Just do it. There is really just no excuse not to. It is one of the only ways to prevent this sort of financial identity theft. And then finally, you might want to consider doing this for your minor children. Children are issued Social Security numbers at birth now, and they have credit reports before they become adults. And they can have loans and credit cards and things in their name. So identity theft doesn't just apply to adults. So you might also want to freeze the credit for your minor children. And on the other end of the spectrum, if you've got elderly parents that are, in a nursing home, for example, or just don't need to get new credit anymore, it's also probably a good idea to freeze their accounts as well. All right, everybody, I appreciate you hanging in there. That was a long one. We had a lot to catch up on today, so thank you for hanging with me. And there is your catch-up news stories and your tip of the week. All right, I will make this quick. I know we are running long. Again, the Dragon Challenge coin promotion expires in a week. If you want to get that coin, you've got one more week to do so. Go to fdsd.me/promo424 for all the details. Also, I'm just going to throw it out there. If you already have a coin, post it on social media and tag me. I will certainly like and probably repost it. Show off that cool coin. I don't mention my newsletter that often, other than to usually say that people who have signed up basically get the tip of the week automatically sent to their inbox. So I would like to just do a quick push on that. You can go to fdsd.me/newsletter, or just go to firewallsdon'tstopdragons.com and look for newsletter. If you sign up, you'll get a little pamphlet with my top 5 tips, and you'll also get a free copy of the first chapter of my book, there's actually a good bit of stuff in there. And then you will never miss one of these tips of the week, and you'll get the nice text version of this that has all the links that I just talk about on the show. So if you haven't signed up for the newsletter, maybe do that. Or if you are signed up for the newsletter, maybe suggest it to some other people you think might enjoy it as well. All right, next week we're going to be talking to Seth for Privacy about a new push for state-backed cryptocurrency and what the implications of that might be. And by the way, next week I should be getting interviewed by Seth to be on his podcast. And when I get the details on that, I will let you know. Then I've got a great interview with Dina Temple-Reston about the Russia-Ukraine hybrid war, hybrid being kinetic and cyber, and some really, really important and interesting stories from that. And then I'll be talking about kind of privacy in general with Naomi Brockwell, which was a lot of fun. That'll be coming up soon too. I'm planning to interview Joseph Cox from 404 Media. We talked to him and Jason last fall. It was a great interview. Joseph has a brand new book coming out soon this summer called Dark Wire. And it's all about the massive global sting operation that was the Anam app. So I'm really looking forward to that. And I've got several other great interviews in the pipeline. So, hey, if you haven't subscribed, now would be a great time to do that. And then you won't miss any of these wonderful interviews. So that'll do it for this week. Take care, everybody. Stay safe out there. And until next week, as always, don't get caught with your drawbridge down.